we seek most of all is a true partnership between the United States and Africa.
Too often, African nations have been treated as instruments of other nations' progress rather than the authors of their own.
That's United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken on a 3-country tour in Africa this week, telling African officials that the U.S. will not dictate the decisions that African governments make, particularly as it relates to the conflict in Ukraine. But there are indications that the opposite is true, which appears to be why Secretary Blinken visited the continent just weeks after Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was there, telling African countries that they have the right to their sovereignty. Joining me today to discuss this issue is Didier Gondola, African history professor at Johns Hopkins University, and Teylama Miabey, president of the National Congress for Democracy. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. I am so glad that this issue of HR7311, which is what we're going to talk about today, which is an indication that in fact the US is not allowing African governments and the African diaspora to make their decisions about things that relate to the conflict in Ukraine. So first of all, I just want to get you guys' initial reactions to what we heard the Secretary of State say as he was visiting the continent today. Didier, I'll start with you.
Well, Hermela, thank you for inviting me to your program. I am really happy to connect with your followers and with your netizens. So my initial reaction to what Anthony Blinken said, I know that he toured 3 African countries, as you said. He first went to South Africa, where he actually met with some resistance, and then he was on his way to the DRC, and then next up was Rwanda. I think that we have to make a distinction between what politicians say, and then those are lofty words, they are lofty principles, and I really like the fact that the U.S. Actually position is softening a little bit, at least in public, the public position. But what matters most to us is really what is done behind the scene. And I hope that behind the scene is not going to be business as usual. It's not going to be kind of a total contrast compared to what is said. So I really like the new tone. I really like the fact that, yes, the U.S. will not dictate Africa its policies, because the African countries are sovereign nations. They are entitled to their own policies, to create their own policies, to have their own ambitions, and to actually protect their own interests. And I like what I heard, but my concern is that, is it going to be actually followed by deeds?
So you have some optimism. I'm curious, Teylama, what did you get out of hearing what the Secretary of State said?
Well, first of all, also, I want to say thank you to you and for inviting me, and for the great work you're doing for not only, I guess, for the Ethiopian community, but also the fact that you've been very active in bringing Africans together and having an approach with the normal movement and bringing continental Africans all together. So I think you're doing a fantastic job, and continue that way. I will be a little bit more skeptical than Didier, because I'm a practical person, and I want to see actions. I just don't want to see words. The continent of Africa has suffered enough. The continent of Africa is going through some tremendous difficult experiences. We have suffered too long, and I think that we have to give them the benefit of the doubt, but let's see concretely what they're going to do. We have some very serious problem on the continent of Africa that need to be addressed. President Joe Biden claimed that this is the mandate between autocracy and democracy. We have a very strong autocracy countries on the continent of Africa where abuses are taking place. I think this dialogue of talking about sovereignty of a nation, we also have to take in considerations that so many African countries have dictators in position of power, and all those issues, we have to take them in consideration. And what the U.S. is going to do, we want to see in practice, not just by words. So I'm a little skeptical, and I want to see what they're going to be able to do practically.
Right. And I mean, that kind of leads us to the issue of U.S. House Bill HR 7311. I mean, it's great that Secretary Blinken is saying these things. I mean, it's on one hand, it feels a little ridiculous that it has to be said that African countries are sovereign countries. On the other hand, it's good that we're saying it, right? We're no longer dancing around the issue, and it sort of admits and suggests that they weren't treated that way before. And I guess the question that we all have is what it will look like moving forward. So when Secretary Blinken was in Africa, he visited 3 countries. South Africa was one of them. And I discovered the South African International Relations Minister as a character that was particularly strong in the way that she spoke up about the sovereignty of African countries. And she actually brought up this U.S. House Bill 7311, which did quietly pass the House. And it seems to be doing exactly the opposite of what Secretary Blinken says the U.S.'s stance is on the sovereignty of African countries. So I want to play a little bit of the South African International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor and what she said while sitting next to Blinken, and then we'll discuss.
I'm glad that Secretary Blinken has confirmed that America is not asking us to choose. I don't recall any attempt by the United States to do that. But in terms of our interaction with some of our partners in Europe and elsewhere, there has been a sense of a patronizing bullying toward you choose this or else. And the recent legislation passed in the United States of America by the House of Representatives, we found a most unfortunate bill that we'd hope the media would say more about, because when we believe in freedom, as I'm saying, it's freedom for everybody. You can't say because Africa is doing this, you will then be punished by the United States. So that's been a disappointing passage of legislation by one house, and we hope the other house will not agree to such offensive legislation.
So, like I mentioned, 7311 quietly passed the House. A lot of us were actually paying attention to it when it first sort of came to our attention, but then we didn't even catch the fact that it passed the House. It just kind of happened under the radar. Teylama, I want to start with you because I know you sort of initiated a petition against that particular 7311 bill. Reading it, what came to mind?
Well, I think it's precisely what is wrong with people who have been interacting with the continent of Africa for centuries. There's a construct that has taken place in the history of Africa, and as we are trying to make a sense of the House Resolution 7311, I think it's essential for us to briefly revisit the social construct that originated in the infantilizations of the black race. In recent history, around the 18th, 19th century, the European constructed, painted, polluted a narrative that was destructive to the African continent by infantilizing Africans, denying them as a mature people, as a human being. In fact, that narrative that was constructed in the 18th, 19th century, Africa has suffered, and we continue to suffer of it today, where we are perceived as little children. And what the treatment that has been applied to the Africans is basically that. And so what you see in that resolution is basically an expression of those thought process that took place in the 18th century, ideology that was constructed, the infantilization of Africans that was constructed by philosophers like Hegel, German philosopher of the 19th century, one of the father of the modern philosophy, who basically described Africa as children. In fact, in his book called Reason and History, Hegel stated the following as he talks about Africa. He says, "This is the land where men are children, a land lying beyond the daylight of self-conscious history, an envelope of the black colors of night." He says, "At this point, let us forget Africa, not to mention it again, for Africa is not an historical part of the world." So that social construct, right, was done in the 18th century. I mean, there are other philosopher, writer, explorer we can quote, but they all turning around the idea that Africans are children. And so throughout history, that idea has been established, and it is basically part of what we're dealing today. When the House passed a resolution telling us that you Africans, you have to listen what we tell you. If you don't listen what we tell you, we will punish you, we will sanction you. Basically, what they're saying, they're talking to us like we are little children. That is the language we use to talk to kids. And precisely, they view us as children. And so that needs to stop, because that has been at the essence of the wrongdoing that has taken place for the African continent. And there has to be a time when we need to stand to put an end to the destruction and the ideology that has been at the essence of the destruction of the African people. I've been a little long, but I'll come back to some of the points that I want to make on this idea.
Hey everybody, please support independent journalism by going to patreon.com/HermelaTV and becoming a member. Thank you so much for your support.